Welcome to the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. This week, we are catching up with some of our guests from top episodes in 2024. Joining me today, once again, is Hans Nederend from Nederend Dairies in Idaho. Hans joined us earlier this year as we talked about how he maintains world-class milk quality on his dairies, and also his perspectives on pursuing greatness and perseverance. Well, we catch back up with Hans today to hear how 2024 brought challenges to him and his dairies, but also how it changed him, helped him see the strengths of his team and his leadership, and the one word that he's chosen to live by in 2024, right here on the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. So it was January when we would have first connected and also recorded your podcast. And they went on to be very popular episodes. We did one really focusing on your management style and how that has led to being a world-class milk producer, piggybacking off of the awards that you've received from National Mastitis Council consecutively, and your history at the dairies there of running under 100 somatic cell count, well under that, for a long time. And then we also were able to have a really cool conversation that I shared on the podcast. That was really getting more into the way you look at things as a manager, but more than that, as a dairyman, as a dad, trying to balance a lot of things and live life and be a leader in a lot of ways. And so we're coming back now. Catch us up. What has been going on since earlier in 2024? What's challenged you and what's changed you this year?
So the hardest thing a lot of dairymen have gone through is the bird flu deal. That was really hard to manage. I was kind of hopeful for a while that we were going to make it through it without getting it, but that was wishful thinking. We were one of the last areas to get it. I was taking all types of precautions to mitigate the chances of getting it, but I don't think any of it really helped. I think it just had to run its course. We got bird flu in June. And your herd will have like 14 days prior to symptoms. But when the cows started showing, it all came about within about 48 hours. It just went rampant through the herd. So you feel better knowing that there's other people around you going through it. So it does make it a little easier to swallow. It's not like you're the only person dealing with this issue. A lot of people are going through it. It's just part of the industry, right? You just handle those ups and downs.
Yeah, another curveball, and a curveball that you couldn't have predicted, right? You can prepare for all kinds of volatility and expected challenges, but this one was pretty unexpected. As you mentioned, there were a lot of people in your area that did end up having to deal with this. There's still a lot across the country that have, but there's some that have not. So share a little bit about what that was like. So once you knew you had it, what did those next couple of weeks look like?
The most disappointing thing about getting the bird flu when we got it was, so we got it in the beginning of June. I mean, just like a lot of dairies are doing, but every year things are getting better theoretically on the dairies, right? Milk production's going up, breeding's getting better, components are getting better. Things are just progressively always improving as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? But so we were smashing personal records for us. Like we went in like to April, May, and we were just like our protein, butterfat, energy corrected milk, everything was personal records for us. I was pretty excited going into the summer. We had a fairly cool summer out here too. So it would have been a nice stepping stone to keep going forward. And then, yeah, we hit with bird flu and everything reverted back. We reverted back 5-6 years of all the progression we made. And it really hasn't come back. The milk flow has not come back. I'm hopeful that it comes back on the next lactations for these animals. But the ones that were in the herd, they lost their peaks, right? So they're done for that lactation. Breeding has not come back fully to where it was. Better than it was during bird flu, for sure, but not near where it should be, especially for this time of year. In fall, coming out of summer, usually you're doing pretty good on breeding. And yeah, we're not. So, I mean, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not where we want to be right now.
And that's frustrating because, as we talked about in your previous episode, there's a lot of things that you track in incredible detail, whether it's those performance metrics or even the performance of your people working on the dairy, the folks that are your milking professionals in the parlor. It's really hard when you have that mentality and drive to want to continue to get better and then to have to take steps back for something you really didn't have a ton of ability to control. In our previous conversation, you talked about how you really intentionally worked to build up your team and incentivize your people and motivate them. How did your team rise to the challenge of having suddenly to not just do their regular jobs, but now you had to kind of mobilize to treat these cows, and it takes a lot out of people, right? What did you see in your team about how they rose to that challenge, and how did you support them through that?
I saw it on the guys' faces that they were actually truly like disappointed or sad seeing the cows. I don't know if it's the right way or the wrong way, but we removed all those cows from going into the milk tank. So all the cows that were showing symptoms got moved into a separate pen, but it was kind of an organized mess. We had planned what we were going to do, but the way we were moving cows around and the cows were going into different pens and we had heifers and cows mixed, the whole thing was kind of a mess, but in the end, it worked out well. I mean, we had guys staying till 7, 8 o'clock at night treating cows. And I'm not even saying treating work. It's just one of those things that early on, that's what we thought we needed to do. And the guys rose to the occasion. They never complained. There was guys working 7 days a week and they were there. My managers were there on Sunday. It was a crisis management type situation, right? The guys in the barn would talk to them about cleanliness because there was talk at the time, and I still don't know if this is true or not, it's being spread in the barn, right? So we were taking extra precautions there. They're wearing like hazmat suits, not like the big helmets that look like aliens, but they were wearing hazmat suits to changing those out every day because I wasn't really sure where it was coming from or how it was spreading. So we were trying different things and they were open to doing whatever needed to be done. I was really proud of them. They did such a good job that we actually stayed under 100 somatic cell for that time frame. I think I got a little lucky because we got it halfway through the month of June. So it was like June like 13th we got it. So our beginning of the month was really good somatic cell. And the end of the month was averaging over 100, but the month averaged right at 100.2 or something like that. And he had, or 99.2, 99.7, I don't know. We were like a half a point away from missing it. The guys actually were super proud that they did that. And I kept their bonuses going because of it. They did a great job. I'm really proud of the guys for that.
So you really saw your people rise to the occasion too. And you saw also like they really cared about the work that they were doing. They cared about taking care of the cows. They showed up, they stayed late, and it wasn't just because you were incentivizing them to do it. And you mentioned that you kept their bonuses. Just refresh on how you do those milker bonuses and why that was important to keep that piece in place for your people.
My dad started the bonus system a long time ago, 15, 20 years ago. But it was different. If we were under 200, that was good. As I said earlier, things are always getting better. So when we started going under 100, then I made their bonus only applicable if they're under 100 somatic cell. But as things started getting better from there, I dropped it down to 80. If they're under 80, they get a bonus. And then they went to under 60, they get a bonus, right? And then it's tiered up from there. So they get so much for being under 60, so much for being under 80, and so much for being under 100. Anything over 100 is nothing. They were doing a good job. It's nothing they did wrong. If anything, they probably helped us, right? We were under 60 pre-bird flu or 61, something like that. I kept their bonus at that level, even though we went to right at 100. Because, I mean, they really did work really hard to mitigate. Bird flu is like a colostrum mastitis type situation, right? And those guys are pulling cows, so many cows in the barn. We were pulling 80 cows a day. It's a lot of extra work for those guys to go up there, move the cows, get them out of the barn, separate them. And so it was nothing of their fault that I felt like they deserved to obviously keep their pay because they did their job. It's nothing that they did. So yeah, I was proud of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about the greater impacts that bird flu had on your herd specifically, what were the groups that you found had the highest impact or the hardest hit?
Our vets told us that if we start to get bird flu on our dairy, it's going to come in our later lactation corrals. So I was prepared for that. I was checking those pens every day, seeing if we saw symptoms. Weirdly enough, it started in our heifers on our facility. It started in our first lactation corral. And those animals, they didn't get hit the hardest, but that's where the most came from. The older lactation animals, there was fewer of those than there were heifers. the 6, 7, 8 lactation cows, those ones, they just didn't bounce back how they should. I mean, unfortunately, we had a little bit of culling that we had to do. Those cows were so skinny. It's amazing how much weight a cow can lose so fast. Like they just didn't want to eat. They were sick, right? So they just didn't come back. And then, I don't know, the older cows got hammered the hardest, but the heifers had the most symptoms, like the most clinical symptoms going on in there.
So for you, yeah, you saw it in that group, which is a little bit different. Have you talked to other dairymen that have had a similar experience to yours?
Everybody was kind of different. One of my good friends has a dairy out here, and on his dairy, he had it in his later lactation. That was more of the common denominator out here, later lactation animals. I really don't know why. At the time, I thought about, like, why are we having it so much in our heifers? But it's kind of one of those things that you want to put out of your mind and not think about too much anymore. So I don't have an answer on why it was there.
So you were at risk of this happening just like every dairy producer, and you were prepared for having to deal with it. But looking back, is there anything you would have done differently?
I talked to a dairyman down in New Mexico. He didn't move any animals out of corrals. He actually left all his animals in the corrals and told his milkers if they have bird flu or these symptoms to not milk them. They don't have any milk right now anyway, so just don't milk them for like 3 or 4 days or whatever it was, which I had a hard time justifying because I don't know how to tell guys to not milk cows. He said that he did that and then he came back stronger. He came back to where he was before, right? So it makes me wonder if maybe that was the right approach, to just not move animals around, because that's just extra stress on them. But I don't have any proof on that. Most everybody I know around here moved animals out of the milking herd into a separate corral and just still milked them every day, but just obviously dumped that milk down the drain, which is obviously really bad for morale too, because they see milk going down the drain. I don't know the right approach on it. I just think that if we had to do it over again, I'd probably keep them in the corrals.
So this was a big challenge that you and your entire team at the dairies faced in this past year in 2024. And as you mentioned, there's still things that you're dealing with on the repro side that are lasting impacts. So on that note, let's switch the conversation to the greatest wins. When you look back on the past 12 months or so, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
The older I get, I'm starting to realize when I was young, I would get super concerned about a problem. Like I would just be like, I would lose sleep. I would be over the top about certain things. Now, the older I get, I realize that everything has a time and place. You're going to come out of whatever these problems may be. Like 5 years ago, we were struggling finding labor, right? And then you're thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to milk cows today? What if nobody shows up? And what if everybody quits? You start to overthink everything. In reality, people show up. People still do their jobs. Most people are happy where they're at. Problems usually are not as big as they seem, but in the moment, they're really big. I just find it interesting that I've been doing this for 18 years now, that it's just everything always has an end. There's always a sunset on every problem, and then there's always good that's going to come out of it. And I just think that to overreact about certain things, even bird flu, I knew it was coming. You just dealt with it. And then it's going to go away because you heard about other dairymen that had it and they're okay now. You can't overreact about every little thing that happens or even big things that happen, because there's always an end. That's how I try to look at it now.
That's quite the perspective. It kind of leans also into what I was asking you to share about too, with how did 2024 change you? What I'm hearing through that, Hans, is that one of your wins and recognitions of your own personal change is just the way you've handled adversity.
We had snowmageddon, is what they call it out here in Idaho, and our freestall barns collapsed. And the cows were in there. No cows got hurt, thank God. No people got hurt. But at the time, I thought, oh no, this is going to mess up everything we've been working for. Didn't I handle that the way I should have handled that? Like I was really worried about this. Like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have construction here for a year now. We got to redo all this stuff. And I learned in the end, like now I look back, it's 2024. We came through it. Everything's good. Barns are up. Guys are happy. Cows are good. Everything got taken care of. For that, we had the labor issues where we were struggling finding labor. That all ended up being okay. Now we have the bird flu, right? And that's becoming better. So everything always gets better. I just feel like to overreact and overthink problems is unnecessary because you're always going to have problems. You're always going to have a problem. Like today, I go to the dairy, there's a gate broken. Like there's always a problem. You can't just sit there and overreact about everything because that really takes the joy out of it, doing what you're doing, you know?
So when you look back at how you used to handle some of those challenges and adversities that would pop up, and then you put next to that how you've learned and adapted to handle that now, do you find that you have maybe less overwhelm and find more joy in the day, like kind of helps you fall in love with dairying again?
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, there's bigger things in life, right? If your kids are healthy, your wife is happy, honestly, life isn't that bad. We do what we do because we love what we do. If we're going to do it and hate it, then why are we doing it? You got to just find the joy in doing what you do. Mine happens to be dairy and farming. I just like doing it, but there's tons of problems. When you're in farming season, you have pivots that go down or pumps that break or certain fields that don't produce like they should have. The watering went wrong. Something happened, right? That's fine and all, but as long as you have a plan to fix it for the next time around or do what you can to mitigate those problems, I think in the end, you're fine. To overreact about every problem, I don't know. I just found my biggest thing that's changed me is just calm down about problems. Problems are there. Just handle them.
When you think about how that plays into your role as a leader and an owner and manager, right? And go back to the challenges that came up with bird flu. How do you think the way that you've changed impacted the way your team reacted? Would they have reacted the same way several years ago before you had looked at life differently?
No, I don't think so. For example, if I showed up during bird flu and my hair was sticking straight up and my eyes were all bloodshot and I was out there screaming and yelling, there's nothing they could have done. This is just the virus that came through due to nobody's fault. I think they would have looked at it like, oh my gosh, like this is a major problem. Are we in the right industry? Do I need to look for a different job? They would have overreacted in ways that wouldn't have been beneficial. But if I got there, hey, we'll get through this. This is fine. We have a plan. This is what we've been recommended to do. Let's execute this plan and get it done and we'll get through it. Everybody's saying it's a 2-week course. In 2 weeks, we'll be out of it. We'll be moving cows back to normal pens and things will start to slow down. If you talk in calm terms like that to your men, they have a calmer sense about it. They can think more clearly about doing their job correctly instead of thinking, oh no, the boss, look at his hair, it's sticking straight up in the air. To be a leader, you can't show them your problems, right? Even though you may be worried about it, even if you show like that you're not stressed, like even though you may be stressed internally, but you show that you're not stressed subconsciously, even on yourself, that shows like you can show yourself even that, hey, it's okay. This is all going to be okay.
This last year was like the lesson in real time of some of the things that you have consciously cultivated as a leader over the last several years. And one thing I remember you sharing in our previous podcast, Hans, was how there was a book that changed you and a book that you try to listen to every year during silage harvest season. And the book was How to Win Friends and Influence People. So did you do it again this year?
Yep, I did it all. I guess when I'm driving around cornfields, checking, harvesting and all that, I was playing it in the background. So yeah, I did it again this year.
And because of you, it was one of the books that I listened to while I was out on my long runs, marathon training also. Now you've probably listened to this book, I don't know, how many times?
It's probably been 12 times now, yeah.
12 times. Okay. Was there anything that really jumped out at you differently this year than in years past?
It's always a refresher for me because it's just human nature to forget, right? You just forget what you learned or what you did or whatever. It's just always a refresher for me. Like, oh yeah, okay, I need to, like when I approach somebody, this is how I approach somebody. Look at from their perspective, not my perspective. You look at from their perspective, then you can typically get what you want, but you got to look at it more from their perspective to see how it works for them. And then that's how you can work into what you need out of it.
And so one of the many things that comes back into how you lead, right? How you lead your team and how you lead through challenges. Any other wins that you would chalk up from 2024 for yourself, for the dairy, for your team?
Me and my wife are building a house. So I guess that's a win, a personal win.
That is a personal win. Do you have defined roles in house building as a couple? Like there's certain things that you kind of take care of and certain things that she kind of takes care of?
She's the boss, so she gets to pick design. I don't know anything about design. I just give her a number to stay in, and if she stays in the number, then we're good. So whatever she wants to do within that number.
I like how you roll, making my husband listen to this. So that's exciting on the horizon for you in the next year then, huh?
Yeah, hopefully by next Thanksgiving.
Speaking of next year, I've challenged you to pick a word for the next 12 months. What word did you pick, Hans?
Optimistic. I just think that going through bird flu, and I'm just trying to look at the dairy and my life as just like enjoying every moment, right? My kids are in basketball, like going to basketball game. I mean, they're growing up. Like I was looking at taking a drink of water this morning, my lemon water that I drink every morning. And I have their pictures on the fridge, and it's like from 5 years ago, and they're so little. And I'm like, man, time goes fast, right? So I'm just trying to be more optimistic about who they are, right? And enjoying where the dairy's going and the growth that we're having, and just trying to look at it with the glass half full instead of trying to find the pessimistic side of everything, right? Like, oh, we're so busy with sports. Well, yeah, okay, you're busy, but this is their life and it's going to be over before I know it. So let's just enjoy that.
How fitting that you were like looking at your glass half full as you were thinking about your kids, right? And the optimism, the glass half full analogy. But I think what you just said is what so many of us as parents are feeling, right? And it's the season of life. Like you talked about before with the seasons of agriculture and farming, right? You're going to have things that are going to come, they're going to come and they're going to pass. And our kids are the same, right? Like we only get them for a season. And it's our job to make sure that when they leave us, that they're the best little humans that they can be. And what else do you think you will consciously think about in the next year, or actions that you might take to really take that optimism to a new level?
I think just slowing down. So like at night, I started reading this book to my kids. It's called The Book of Virtues. It has like, I don't know how many short stories about different life lessons. It's just a lot of life lessons, and they're short little stories. So I read that to them at night, but it's more than like trying to teach them. It's like taking time enough to slow down and actually read to my kids, right? They just take time. It's only 10 minutes at night. And a lot of times, at night, I mean, I think most people are just tired and like, it's time for bed. It's loud. Let's everybody just go to bed. Okay, get in your room, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And it's like that still, don't get me wrong, but it's like, okay, let's just take 10 minutes. Everybody be quiet. My 5-year-old, he's bouncing around on the floor, but at least he's quiet and he's reading, right? I'm reading to him. I think it's just taking that little bit of time to enjoy things. I think how God kind of intended us to be, like just slow down and enjoy the moment, right? And it's like in today's busy world, we got phones and TVs and sports. I mean, sports are just overkill in today's world. I feel like to just go read a book, no TV, no phones. And yeah, it's really nice to just enjoy that moment. 10 minutes where they're listening to me and then they ask me questions about the book and I can share with them some of my lessons that I've learned. Maybe some nights it's not like that. Maybe I'm just like, all right, it's time for bed now. But at least there's 10 minutes where it's just like, hey, I get to enjoy these kids.
That is super, Hans. I'm so glad you shared that. I'm going to look up the book, and I think I might do that with my kids as well. What a great idea. So I'm going to steal it. It'll be part of my 2025 as well. Well, this is great, and appreciate you taking the time to catch up with me here, but also appreciate you being open and also sharing about the challenge that you face that a lot of other dairy producers have faced in this past year also. The way that you've chosen to go through that, the attitude that you've taken through a challenging time, and ultimately speaks to your word and your way of looking at 2025 with optimism. So love that for you, Hans. It'll be a good year.
Thank you. I hope so.
You just heard from Hans Nederend from Nederend Dairies in Idaho here on the Up Level Dairy Podcast. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen, and thanks for listening to the Up Level Dairy Podcast.